some critics have suggested, or not suggested, but actually claimed that some of the offenses that'll get you on the registry do not really indicate the kind of psychologically aberrant attitude towards sexual attraction to children that parents would want to know about. That they also include some other more general sexual offenses that are, for instance, not even directed at children. You can get on the registry even if your offense had nothing to do with children. Is that not correct?
That's right.
And is that a concern, do you think?
Well, prior to becoming commissioner, I was the state's attorney in Orleans County, and over that time, I've had an opportunity to prosecute a great number of sex cases in that it basically spanned the gamut. And I think what the concern is, and certainly as a prosecutor, and I carry that with me as commissioner, is that many times these are violent acts. And these are violent acts of a very personal and intimate nature for the victim. And when these violent acts occur, regardless of the nature of the act, it says something in regard to the offender. I know this is certainly something that over the years we've worked very hard with corrections on, as far as the ability to determine risk, to do meaningful risk assessments, and risk assessments that are based on the risk that a person actually presents in a community rather than a risk that's imposed because of legal status. Because I do know that from my past experience in observing sex offenders after their conviction and after sentencing, there are different types of people who are convicted of sex assault crimes pose different risks in the community. And one of the things that we need to do as a community is to get better at assessing those risks so that we can determine what risks, if any, they pose within a community.
So you're saying, you're sort of acknowledging that there's some uncertainty into all this, and it's an ongoing process of determining more precisely who should be on these lists and who should not.
Well, the interesting thing is this. One challenge that the courts have, that prosecutors have, that our judicial system has, is that we are sentencing and we are convicting individuals. No two individuals are the same. Likewise, I believe that no two individuals, even though they're convicted of the same offense, would pose the same risk in the community. So it's important that when we're looking at these matters, that we're trying to look closely at the individual and not grouping them into categories. So I think that it's true that there's no cookie cutter answer to this, and it's because we deal with individuals. And one of the essence of sentencing in this state, and in any state, is that we sentence individuals, not categories of individuals.
Being on the register is a stigma, and there are those who say that the stigma interferes with the effort to reintegrate offenders into the community and thereby rehabilitate them. Do you think that's a problem?
I know I've heard that argument before, and I think it's a legitimate argument that needs discussion anytime you deal with limiting someone's personal or civil liberties within a society. Because one of the things that our system is built on is the ability to rehabilitate. However, we also have a system that is also premised on the idea that we need to protect the members of our community. So what we see is a balancing as to the stigma that it attaches within the communities as balanced against the right to inform members of the community that a potentially dangerous person because of some addiction or some other need to engage in that type of activity exists. So what we're really doing is we're balancing. And I think that's what the legislature does when it decides to impose a requirement of the sex offender registry. It attempts to strike a balance between the social or societal need to be safe versus the privacy interests of the offender.
Okay, one of the things some critics say is that since the vast majority of sexual offenses against children are performed by relatives, friends, acquaintances, are we overdoing, are we spending too much time and effort in this, trying to warn people about the potential offenses from strangers, which are a very, very tiny minority of the actual offenses?
I think it is important, and I think it's important because of this. I think it's also a very small minority of offenders that are sexual offenders. And when you look at measuring risk, and if we're basing it on the premise that we're trying to understand the risk of a few individuals, those few individuals have the potential to do great harm. So we need to make sure that we're understanding the risk of even the minorities that commit these offenses, even if it's a small segment of the larger group of sex offenders, so that we're predicting risk, or at least assessing that risk, so that we're adequately protecting the community.
But you seem to be interested in refining this whole process so that it's even more precise and centers as much as possible on the people who pose the risk, and perhaps ease up on the others. Could we get to that point?
I don't know if I'd say ease up on the others, because I think that we have an obligation to monitor all people that are convicted of an offense and are under supervision. But I always think that one of the challenges that constantly faces the criminal justice system is the ability to evaluate with appropriate risk tools. And that is an evolving science, and I know it's evolved greatly over the last 20 years, where we're beginning to understand now why people offend, what are the triggers for offenses, whether it's opportunistic or whether they go out searching for these opportunities. And that's a lot about understanding the behaviors. But again, I'll get back to it's understanding the behaviors of individuals and what drives a particular individual. So I am very, very much dedicated to the idea that we do need to find a way to refine the system to make sure that we're accurately assessing the risks that people pose. But on the other hand, we have to be aware of the greater group to make sure that we don't lose sight of the forest through the trees, essentially.